Hello, this is Diane from Twin Cities Photography Group, and today we're going to do a really short and sweet video on what is the difference between opacity and fill. So I begin this lesson by just having a very simple file set up. If you notice, I have a two-layer file. There's a background, which is white, and then there's just basically one layer in it, which is my text layer, which basically says what is the difference between opacity and fill. Yeah, it's going to be that kind of video. Anyway, this layer is basically the layer that I'm going to do most of my demonstration on with the text. So we're going to talk about opacity and fill. Now, for those of you who haven't ever used opacity, basically what opacity does and what fill does is that it's in charge of the transparency of the text, the contents on your file. So at this point, I'm at 100% capacity, and I have chosen my text layer. If I was to move the slider down towards 0, if you notice, my text is going to start fading out. If I go all the way to 0, my text is gone. At this point, fill basically does the same thing. So if I was to back up the opacity to 100%, we're pretty solid again. If I do the same thing with fill and start bringing it down, you'll see the same reaction. My text will disappear. So using fill and opacity over here with the layers, I'm doing it on a layer level. If there was different layers in here, I can basically fade in and out each layer. There's also opacity on the brush level and the clone level. So you can do them on the tool level as well, that you can use your opacity here, where it will show you how strong the brush stroke is or how transparent the brush stroke is. But I'm not going to talk about that today. You can try that on your own. Just wanted to point it out. Anyway, so the difference comes between opacity and fill when you use styles. That's when you start to see the difference. So if I was to set some styles onto this text layer here, I have the text layer chosen, and I'm going to do blending modes. If I do a drop shadow and a stroke, let's say, we're jazzing up, you can see my text has now been jazzed up, and I'll say OK. My layer now is showing that I do have effects on it. It has FX on it, and here, down here, it lists what I've just chosen. So I chose the drop shadow and I chose the stroke. At this point, if I do opacity again on my layer level that's chosen, you will notice it acts the same. Everything disappears. If the further to 0 I go, everything's gone, and it all fades back together if I bring it back up. This is where the rubber hits the road for fill, because with fill it acts a little differently now. If I was to bring it down, you will notice that the content is now disappearing, but the effects aren't. So right now what you're seeing still on the screen is the drop shadow and the stroke. That is the big difference between fill and opacity. If you're working with styles and effects, you want to use fill, because then you can fade out your content and leave your effects in. If you're not working with styles or effects, it doesn't matter, because fill and opacity will always work the same then. But it is a nice little thing to know, and if you haven't fooled around with it enough, you may have missed that little nuance. I know I did for quite a few years until somebody pointed it out. So I really enjoy the fact that I know that now, and I hope that it helps you with your creative endeavors. And hopefully we'll see you down at the studio sometime. Come on in if you're in Minnesota and St. Paul. Drop by Twin Cities Photography Group. Thanks. Bye.